Hello and welcome to the Overland Journal podcast. I am your host, Scott Brady, and I am here for day one of the Overland Expo. It is very well attended. There are people everywhere and booths everywhere, but I got to take a few minutes to spend some time with a longtime friend, Jim Markel, and he is the co-founder and CEO of RedOxx bags. Now, these are bags I have used around the world, and this podcast is not really so much about that product, but it is my appreciation for them and the fact that I've used them on 7 continents that really led me to want to have a conversation with Jim. And we've also gotten to know each other from some travels together as well. And I learned a little bit about his story, which I find fascinating, and I think you all will very much enjoy today. So thank you, Jim, for being on the podcast today.
Awesome, Scott. Great to be here.
Yeah. Well, the one of the first things that come to mind is how your company was founded. Your father's involvement and his involvement in your life and his military career is so interesting. Would you mind sharing a little bit about your dad?
Well, everybody, says, who's your hero? And I think Superman or whatever. And my Superman was my father. And he led by example. He spent 9 years in the Marine Corps and 11 years in the Army. He was an officer. He was enlisted. Started out, Mustanged up through Vietnam, 3 tours with the Green Berets, and then he switched over to the Marine Corps and finished out his career in Marine Recon.
Yeah, amazing. And so your dad, he served in Vietnam. What other areas of the world did he serve in as well?
Well, he was in Okinawa and Germany. I was born in Italy.
Okay.
And while he was in OCS, so that was in the 60s. And we were all over. So with 2 branches of the service under his belt, I ended up transferring to 17 different schools growing up all over the United States. And I sometimes forget all the different places I've lived. And then I'll see something on the news. I'm like, I used to live there.
Well, and that's one of the questions that I wanted to ask you is that ability to travel around the world that way. How did that prepare you for your own travels, your own adventures? Think back on some of the skills you gained by living in all these countries and maybe share with the audience what you feel is kind of the fundamentals or the foundations of what you learned as a traveler.
Well, one of the things is when you're always a new kid, you get tested and you learn to be observant, right? So you come into social situations, and you need to make friends quickly.
Sure.
And you don't need to make a lot of friends, but you better make one. And being observant, I think that was something that developed naturally within me. So you learn the lay of the land. If you live in the South, you learn how the Southern people live, and then in the North and Pennsylvania, or when we were on recruiting duty.
Sure.
There, and then I'm back out to California a few times and learning how to surf, and so you just kind of like accept whatever culture you're in at the time.
Yeah.
And so you're kind of a chameleon, but it also influences the way you think. You don't realize it at the time, but you're actually developing skill sets that will serve you later on in life.
And when you look back, and it's just so wonderful to hear you talk about your father in the way that you do, because I feel very much the same about my own dad. But what were some of the key lessons that you took away from him? Like when you think back on your dad's life, or maybe even the things that he sat down with you and shared that were important for him, for you to know, what were some of those key lessons that you feel like you took away from your dad?
Discipline, self-discipline, make a promise, keep it.
Yeah.
And never quit.
Yeah.
You're capable of way more than you realize. And he would really never accept no for an answer. I'd say, well, why didn't you clean your room or whatever? And to the point where, because I was always on the go, right? And so, if I could get out and go to the beach before cleaning the room, he'd make me stand inspection on Sunday mornings before I could go to the beach. And especially once I got a car, because I try to slip out early in the morning. He's like, not so fast, So, and he taught me fieldcraft and bushcraft and how to think asymmetrically. And so he was always challenging me in ways that, for my personality, I was very pretty wild child, as they say. And, but I was very independent and headstrong. And so at 17, he shipped me off to the Marine Corps, and they tampered that down a little bit. But I was still pretty wild in the Corps too. Yeah,
well, and I same thing for me. My grandfather was in the Marines. He was a chief warrant officer. He served Iwo Jima, Guadalcanal, And he is certainly one of the heroes in my life and has had such an impact in my life. And he only passed away last year at 95 years old. 3 Purple Hearts. I mean, an amazing guy. And that was one of the things that I remember so much from him when I was growing up, is that he was tenacious. Like when he went from the military into the civilian world, he realized that people give up too early. And I remember him telling me that. I remember that was one of the few things that he shared with me, is that you just don't give up.
Right.
You just keep, and he built his own kind of empire of his own business after he got out of the military. And it made such a difference for our entire family after that happened. So it's pretty amazing to see the lessons that we learn in the military, how they translate to the civilian space. So maybe that's the next question for you is, how long did you spend in the Marines? What were some of the experiences that you had that you'd like to share with the audience that you think were formative to your life? And then what real lessons did you take away from that experience?
Well, the overarching lesson from the military for me would be that you learn everything you ever needed to learn about leading people right there.
Yeah.
And I served for 4 years. And, you know, crazy as my old man, I wanted to jump out of airplanes and started out as a parachute rigger in air delivery. And then I was at the pool one day and doing shallow water, long distance swimming for money. And the gunnery sergeant caught on to it and confiscated the bedding and had a company party. And then a month later, I got orders to recon battalion in California. And
sure.
He kind of looked at me as like, I got just the place for you. And
put that energy to good work.
Right. I was a pretty mischievous corporal. By the time I got out, I was an NCO, but I was pretty much, you know, running amok within the company and organizing and, you know, having parties and then doing adventure trips with the guys. We'd all pile, you know, our Serapis on our mountain bikes and head off into the boonies for the weekend. And so it was kind of like, it was a lot of fun. I learned a ton. You know, no combat time. I was in from 85 to 89, but the training and stuff is pretty intense. A lot of injuries and stuff like that. People get hurt. A few fatalities and things like that definitely show you that it's not just fun and games. You know, when you're serving, you can be taken out really quickly.
Yeah, and I think for me, when I look back on my time in the Air Force, it was just the fact that the military gave me a framework that I desperately needed at 19 years old. I just didn't. I felt like I was a ship with all of this potential. All the sails were up. I was ready to go into the world, but I had no rudder. So I just felt like I was being blown around in every direction. And I don't speak for anybody else. It's just from my experience, the military, it helped me build that rudder of realizing that if you set a goal and you aim towards it, a lot of times you'll get there. And to also leave with the GI Bill, I don't know if that was something you also were able to take advantage of, but for me to be able to pay for my education that I wouldn't have been able to afford otherwise, it paid for my first home. Those kinds of things, the military gave me such a leg up in the areas that I needed, that I desperately needed. So
yeah, it was I think the starting point for my life. The 4 years went by so fast that rather than go to college, I went to the military.
Sure.
I tried to go to college after the military, and that's about the time I started into business for myself. And before I realized that I had employees and big responsibilities, and I walked away from college after about a year and a half, and I don't have any regrets with that.
I think it's actually a great choice for most people. There are certainly professions that require education, like if you want to become a lawyer or whatever, or a doctor. Yeah, that's a good idea. No trial and error for that. But certainly the pursuit of business, when I look back on my degree, I don't think that I really took much away from that I applied to my own business, but I definitely learned on the job. When I worked in other businesses, and I was lucky to have wonderful bosses, and they taught me so much about being a leader and a businessman. And you had that in your dad. So if I remember correctly, your dad founded RedOxx, and then you started working with him. How did that all happen?
So I was at the Paraloft there and at Camp Pendleton, and the phone rings, and it's Senior on the phone. He's like, I need some webbing, thread, and some other stuff. He goes, go down to the DMRO locker, which is the decommissioning locker, and send me some stuff. Send me a care package.
Sure. So
the RedOxx was founded on petty larceny. And so I took a Foot Locker, filled it full of thread and webbing, and put it on the Greyhound bus to Billings, Montana.
Wow.
So Dad's last duty station was he was the NCOIC of training, non-commissioned officer in charge of training for the 4th Recon up there in Billings, Montana, when they had a unit back there. So anyway, and then I forgot all about it. And, 3 years later or so, I get out, and then he asked me to come join him, gave me the talk. I was living in the mountains of Colorado.
Still feral?
Oh, I went completely feral. I bought a Harley. And
that is feral.
Yeah, and moved up to a little cabin that had no hot running water, and the rent for the year was $1,800.
Wow!
And you chopped your own wood, the deal.
Amazing.
And it was a great year. I made actually zero money that year, and I lived off my savings and kind of decompressing. I was
interesting.
By that time I would moved over to Force Recon, and so a lot of intense training and I hadn't realized the psychological pressure of continuous high-speed training like that, what it does to your mind.
Sure.
It spins you up tight. And I didn't realize how tight I was. And so I took a whole year and did absolutely nothing but ride motorcycles and hunt deer and chase women.
Gotcha. So that year that you were in the cabin, because I can see how this translates to your love of overland travel as well. But talk to me a little bit about that experience. How did you unwind? Like, what were some of the things that you found really made the difference? Was it that you just had moments of quiet, or what was it that really helped you unwind to the point that you could take your dad's call for the next step?
Solo camping. I would take my rucksack and my dog and load up a handgun and just head off into the hills around Pikes Peak area. And I would camp for 3 or 4 or 5 days alone with the dog, and I continued that practice for quite a few years. And then I bought a Toyota Land Cruiser, a little FJ40 with a 327 in it.
Oh, nice.
And by then, we just would have our adventures. And my dad, at that point, he gave me about a year, and he came down to Colorado and gave me the talk.
Sure.
Son, you need to get direction in your life again. Yeah. I don't mind the long hair, but so I thought about it. He left, and I let's just say I had an incident with somebody in a fist fight, and I was wanted for assault. So I jumped on the bike and booked it to Montana.
Yeah,
and as
good place to hide out.
Yeah, good place to hide out. So. And from that point, the school started, and I started straightening my life out a little bit. By the time I was 26, I quit drinking, which was a big turning point.
For sure.
I think I was using alcohol to cope with some probably form of minor PTSD. Been through a lot in my life. A lot of close scrapes.
Sure.
When I say I was pretty wild as a child, I was definitely on the outer limits of
keeping it together.
Oh yeah. A lot of risk taking.
Sure.
Poor impulse control, as they say.
Yeah, sure.
So Dad, at that point, we were doing. RedOxx was founded in the weight training category. We did lifting straps, weight training belts. We worked for companies like Joe Weider.
How cool is that?
Yeah, it was awesome. Yeah, and so we were like this little manufacturing company that started with nothing, and we were servicing business to business. And then that was in the 90s. And then as China rose, we got squeezed out. And Dad wanted to retire, and so that's when I was getting more into the hunting phase of my life. And so I started making hunting gear and doing hunting shows and then travel bags and stuff like that, because I kept breaking everything that I've ever owned unless it was military grade.
Sure.
And so demand, I'm pretty hard on gear. So I just started making my own stuff. And then we eventually exited the fitness category, which we've now just kind of brought back for our 35th anniversary.
That's kind of fun, though.
Yeah, just a couple things. And honoring Dad, we did a poster of him when he was in his bodybuilding days. He used to be a semi-professional bodybuilder.
Amazing.
He was a beast. I mean, big arms and
Sure.
So, but I never put on the size that he did. He got to be. He started me in the gym at 11 years old, and all I did was get scrawnier and more wiry.
Sure.
But
it has its place too.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So pound for pound, I was very strong. But,
sure.
But I never got any size.
Yeah, sure. Well, the thing that one of the things that I wanted to ask you is what makes a great bag? Because one of the things that I have noticed is that there are more and more companies that are now also offering soft goods, and some of it is good and some of it is not good. What are some of the things that, if you were to give people advice on what to look for in luggage, in soft luggage, in bags that you would store your equipment in your vehicle, what are some of the key components that you would recommend people look for?
Well, I like redundant failure points. Number one, it's kind of a mil-spec civilian market philosophy. So it'll start to break here. There's a backup point in it. So I build things like that. Less pockets is better. And so when I was a young rigger, I would make the officers' bags and trade them for parachute jumps. And they'd say, I'll take you up again 2 more times. And so some days I'd get 4 or 5 jumps.
How cool is that?
Bribe the pilots, right?
Sure.
That's how the military works, folks.
No doubt.
And so less is more. Minimalism, and it even goes to the point to what, you don't want to, you think you'd want a pocket for everything until you go hunting through a bunch of pockets. And so I've gotten into color coding and I've been into it forever and a day. And so I'll color code interior compartments like little packing cubes that we do with brighter colors.
Sure.
And everybody's like, why don't you make things in camouflage? And I'm like, I literally, even though I served active duty 4 years, I was born in the military. I feel like I did my 20.
Sure, you did, literally.
And so things like that is what I look for. Rugged, reliable, that's great. And, some of the stuff, that if you look at some products that are made, they're built in a way that how should I put this? They're engineered for manufacturing, not for use.
Oh, sure.
And so what engineering for manufacturing means is like you lower the cost in a lean way, and you just keep cutting steps out. Sometimes cutting those steps out hurts the dependability of the product.
Right.
And so building and handcrafting in a way makes our products, I believe the toughest, strongest products that they can possibly be.
Yeah.
Now, are they the easiest and fastest to build? No, but we do that for a reason.
Yeah.
And
you do make them in the United States, don't you?
Absolutely. And we source, we're like Berry compliant, which is the Berry Amendment. We could sell directly to the military if we wanted to, but that's not the model.
Yeah, there's a couple things that I've noticed on the soft bags is you've got to have a way to lash them down. That seems to be really important in the vehicles because we're talking about putting bags on racks. We're talking about putting bags in the storage compartment in the back of an SUV or in the back of a pickup. So having rings or loops that you can tie the bags down with. Another thing that I like to do is tie bags together. So carabiner, 2 corners of 2 bags together, which now becomes essentially a net if you keep building it across the load surface, and then you lash down at the corners. So now you don't have these bags flying around in the inside of a vehicle. It's also one of the things that I notice is a lot of bags, a small bag will have a zipper, maybe even a waterproof zipper. But then when you get to their biggest bag, it has the same zipper. That doesn't work. I've had those failure points where the small bag, you can't load it up with enough weight to have a zipper failure. It's the right zipper for that bag. But when you get to a 60-liter bag or an 80-liter bag or a 100-liter bag, and it still has this very small waterproof zipper on it, that's where I tend to see failures is, you drop one of the handles and then just splits the whole thing open because they can't take that kind of pressure. And what I notice with your bags, this is not about RedOxx, but it happens to be a good example, is that you'll have one of these little belt packs and it'll have the same zipper on it as a 100-liter bag. So they're all really built.
Well, like I said earlier, I was really hard on gear. I still am. I'll buy the best and beat it. It's kind of a philosophy that I live by. I don't mind spending money on quality.
Sure.
But if I want to hammer a nail with my pocket knife, it better be able to handle it. So
sure.
I've got a nice Chris Reeves titanium knife that I've had for 20 years, and I've shown it to people, and they're like, "That's really used." I'm like, "But it's not broken."
And I think that's one of the things that a lot of us are trying to pay attention to now. I find myself doing that is if I can buy something that will last long enough for me to give it to my nephews, those purchases start to feel a little bit better to me now. I realize that I just get this overload of equipment. I mean, the industry that we're in, we're always getting equipment, but it's interesting the things that stay. Like we'll donate to charities and we'll give it to some of our other editors, but the things that I tend to keep personally are those components that should last a lifetime because I just don't want the frustration of having a failure in the middle of Africa. I mean, I believe in our conversations that part of what made you build these bags the way that you do is because you want to go to the middle of Africa. You want to go hunting, and you don't want to have equipment failure in the middle of nowhere. And when you talk about gear like that, you just talk about the Chris Reeves knife. What are some other pieces of kit that you have just come to know and love throughout the years? What are some other gadgets that you're just like, this is the one?
So when it comes to like new gadgets, so right now I'm really in love with these new Goal Zero pop-up lanterns. So every few years when I want to refresh the kit, I'll hop on down to the outdoor store and grab some stuff and just see what's out on the market. There's Julie string lights with the phone charger. I bought that as well for this trip because my old stuff, remember the blow-up ones they had? Those are toast. And then like my standby gear, believe it or not, I still have a 1940s mess kit.
Nice.
And I don't hike with it or anything, but I still have it in the rig in the Sprinter. And I'm pretty minimalist though. I mean with Nalgene bottles. I love those things. And then we have Seki Edge, which is a brand out of Japan, makes tweezers and personal grooming because field sanitation is very important.
It is.
I mean, they beat that into us literally. You have to stay clean in the field.
Yeah, trench foot's a big problem.
Yeah. So, and I've got a basic tent that I picked up. It's a Green Sport tent from South Africa. I've been using that for years. A National Luna fridge that I bought from Equip One when they literally first started, probably from the first container.
Yeah.
Because we were using those in Africa, and those fridges are amazing.
They are. They last forever.
Yeah. So I've got a very basic kit, and I think last night when I laid down to sleep, I'm sleeping on my Butler bag from
those things are awesome.
Yeah, things like everybody's like, I'll turn on my heater. I'm like, dude, I don't need a heater.
Those are made in Utah, aren't they?
Cedar City, Utah.
That's right.
Yeah, and
those things are gnarly.
Yeah, so I'll take that bag, a Rollicott, which is another domestic product. So you see a little theme here where I'm buying a lot of U.S., European, or South African made gear. I'll put that in a big duffel. That'll go below the plane. That's my home. Sometimes no tent. I'll just sleep under the stars, especially because I really have come to like West Africa.
Sure.
And then I'll have a carry-on bag with no more than 3 of anything. No more, and usually 2, like 2 pairs of shorts. Wear 1 pair of long pants. I wear my nice outfit on the airplane.
Yep.
And a sport coat even sometimes.
Sure.
And then I put all my other gear in my carry-on bag, and then I have a personal item which carries a pair of Leica binoculars, which I've had for 20 some odd years. And then a couple of different Surefire flashlights that I scored from an old Marine Corps buddy who worked at Surefire.
Yeah, sure.
And other than that, that's about all I'll take. And then you can always find a lean-to, a hut somewhere.
Totally. Plenty of abandoned
sleep
huts.
under the truck if you have to.
It's a good spot.
And the lions don't want to kind of come around the smell of diesel fuel. They don't really typically like that smell. At least that's what my African friends tell me.
Sure.
So I can go to sleep at night.
That's what they tell you.
That's what they tell the tourists. Yeah, you'll be fine, man.
It'll be just fine. Yeah, no. Oh, those are all great. Those are all great recommendations for sure. Now that we're getting into the topic of travel a little bit, let's talk about some of your favorite places on the planet and maybe share your more interesting stories. What's Jim's top 1 or 2 most interesting stories of your travels?
Wow. There's a lot. Yeah. So
which one should go in the book?
Yeah, which one should go in the book? There's a couple there. I would say like one of the most inspiring trips I had was a trip to Namibia, and we went and did some volunteer work, and I work with a friend of mine who's a medical professional, and we bring medicine for trachoma for river blindness out to the orphanages and the hospitals. And we also raise money for mosquito nets, and we'll go there and we'll buy the nets in Africa, load them onto the Land Cruiser, and take them to the orphanages and the hospitals.
Sure.
Found that type of distribution system works really well rather than trying to go to individual villages.
Sure.
So you give the most where you can. And so we went through Etosha and then across to the west through the Honi River Valley, which you've been through. And Hama, my friend Hama, he served in the South African Defense Forces, so he knows all these great campsites that nobody knows about, and awesome. Nobody will ever know because I'm never going to give them up.
You're not geotagging that spot.
No, sir. And then we came down to the Skeleton Coast and then run down the Skeleton Coast.
Stunning.
And that's part of what I really love about traveling, and living in eastern Montana is a lower population. And the population in the world has grown a lot in our lifetimes. And so finding the least populated places where I tend to be able to see the stars and not have any security issues and things like that are more, I would say, the more inspiring trips. You know, the elephants cruising, you know, riding along on the roof, and elephants at arm's distance, and my friend in the cab he goes, "What am I going to tell your wife when you get killed?" I'm like, "Tell her I had a great time."
A smile on my face.
And then probably like the craziest story, I guess not the craziest, but one of the more craziest stories. Early on in probably the first time I went on a Land Rover trip with these guys, we had 3 Land Rover vehicles for a magazine shoot, and I sunk the one in the Dolores River.
I remember that story.
Oh man, and that was
with Ben Edmondson on the top.
Right,
he was on the rack trying to film it or something. Like that.
And I felt like such a heel, you know, just because they screamed stop, and I hit the brakes, and the vehicle sucked water and died.
Sure,
total of a brand new Land Rover. My insurance company then took special notice of me, dropped me after 17 years.
Oh, wow.
Had paid out. But, you know, that was kind of one of the more embarrassing things. But I, of course, you know, I've traipsed all over the Philippines and Guam and Korea and the markets. I used to really love to eat a lot of street food. I love to cook. And, you know, you've eaten a lot of my cooking on the trail.
Yeah, great cook.
And so that's one of the things I always tend to find myself in like, I'm good to go ride along. Like some people want to like, oh, I've got to take my vehicle. And I can drive okay. I mean, the guys taught me how to drive decent enough. And I don't have to have my vehicle.
Sure.
So that's why I say the best trips are the ones where I've got a duffel bag and that's it. And I just show up and perform. And like I said, I love to cook in the field. It's one of, you know, I love to cook anyway, but cooking in the fields always provides some challenge. The wind's going to blow, the rain's going to go. And so that's the aspects of the travel that I really like.
That's interesting that you mentioned the cooking, because we haven't really talked about that much on the podcast. But one of the things that I remembered from traveling with you is it is a way to bring a bunch of people that kind of know each other but don't know each other really well together. Is you give them a little bit of food, maybe a couple cocktails, and it just, people start to get around the fire and they get around this great meal. And it is a wonderful way to kind of set the stage for a trip. Yes.
It's so like, you the logistics of having like over 10 people on a Baja trip when we were trying to film a pilot for a TV show.
Sure.
It was a lot of work, you know, and you're talking the meals, like 45 meals a day, you know, and then you pick up, tear down, move again and do it again. And you get to know people and their habits. And we had another former Marine with us along, Taylor Congleton. He's a Land Rover fanatic out of Vermont. And that guy's so big, I had to hide food for him because everybody would.
He's a big guy.
Yeah, you know,
it's so, you know, quite the metabolism.
Yeah,
sure.
And Ben Edmondson's a big dude too, but so I'd have to, like, you know, I keep Ben from eating all of Taylor's food, you know, and so it's like, and then the other guys, you know, they're like Jordan and stuff. I would be like, he's 135 pounds. You get one serving, you know? But you can't let him see you give the big guy an extra slice.
No doubt.
You know? And so,
yeah, that's funny.
Yeah, those are the little things you learn about cooking, and then what foods to buy that last, what to put in the fridge, what, you know, can go in the cool, you know, like a cool dry box.
Sure.
So there's a lot of stuff to figure out. And there's great tips, and of course. And
a lot of people, they don't know that you don't have to refrigerate eggs. They'll keep for several weeks. So just put them in the cool dry box, and then you don't have to take up fridge space. And another thing too is if you get a 12 pack of whatever, just put the drinks that you need for the next couple days and then feed into the fridge, because the drinks don't need to be kept refrigerated. Most drinks don't. Yeah. So those are those little tricks that allow you to go with a smaller fridge. I think that oftentimes people go with too big of a fridge. Like even sitting here in the Scout right now, it has space for an 80 or 90 liter, but I've only got a 55 liter in here because I just feed into the fridge.
Right. I tend to put the delicate things in there.
Sure.
The greens and stuff like
that.
Yeah, for
sure.
That need to be refrigerated. And, you know, some of the crew is like, insisted that their beer is like, well, let's put the beer in the Yeti, you know, but I'm like, I bought this fridge for my beer. I'm like, let's just put the beer in the Yeti and be done. You know,
it totally works great in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, talking about street food, what is some of your favorite places on the planet that you've had street food? Is there a memorable meal?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's talk about that.
We were in Korea for Operation Team Spirit, and we were downtown one night, a bunch of us, and they have these like little egg carts where they take the egg, and it's a coal-fired hot plate.
Okay.
And they lay cabbage and egg in there and some sort of meat.
Okay.
Let's just say it's meat. And they cook it thin like a crepe, and then they roll it up when they put some hot sauce and the kimchi on it. Oh, my God. One night, the three of us stood around this cart at like 2 o'clock in the morning. We ate everything that lady had. She must have had a flat of eggs and 3 jar heads. We just scarfed them all.
I love that. You made her day.
Yeah. We cleaned her out, sent her home at 3 o'clock in the morning with a bunch of money. And
that's so great. We had a similar experience in Baja. We get to this little taqueria, and all they did was shrimp tacos. So they were super specialized, and we cleaned them out. They had no more shrimp.
Yeah.
Us gringos, we ate every taco that they had.
I love it.
It was so good. They were wonderful little family. It was great.
So, on a motorcycle trip through Costa Rica, we stopped in some little town down south of or north of Punta Arenas, somewhere along the coast there. And
sure,
I'm like, I wasn't going any further. I haven't ridden a motorcycle in a while, and we had us on those little 125s, and I was just hurting. I'm like, and the guys
they're terrible.
They're 15 years younger than me, and they're like, oh, it's no problem. And I'm like, dude, I'm not going any further. And there was 5 of us, and so we stayed there until we ate them out of food. And they're like, we have no food. You guys need to leave. So we moved on down the coast.
That's good, man.
Down to Jaco, and after that. But yeah, it's just. Yeah, those are the street food is, I can consider myself a connoisseur of street food. And Guatemala and places like that.
Oh,
the chicken that they do where they cook it once and then they get it ready to cook when you order it, and they dice it again with a cleaver, and then they infuse it with something. Oh my God. Yeah, that is like heaven on earth.
It's so good.
Yeah. So I like to cook like that. I like to cook in cast iron. I'm a wild game, I hunt, so I'm pretty good with wild game. Here in the fridge, I've got some bison I brought down from Montana, and I've been cooking it for our campmates, and they're like, what is this?
Some of the best meat I've ever had was wild game. I mean, I had a bison prime rib one time that blew my mind, absolutely blew my mind. And then I had this eland steak where was I at? I had the eland steak. I think I was in Namibia when I had the eland steak, and I've had it a few times, but that particular moment in time where all the stars aligned, I had a great day in northern Namibia, and I ended up at this little place, and it was just unbelievable. I don't eat as much meat as I used to, but when I do, I try to find wild game because I always feel good after I eat it.
Yeah. So I don't know if it's you or if you have the same experience, but like, I don't sleep in Africa. Like the day begins like before the crack of dawn, and I go, and I don't know. It's something weird about that place. It's just, I feel so charged up.
I wonder, because I've felt the same thing, and there's a lot of the travelers that we know talk about how special Africa is to them, that they even feel like that they've come home. And I think if you just think about the history of humanity, I mean, it all kind of started there. And so I think that genetically we kind of feel alive. We feel a little bit charged up in that place. I mean, way back in our hypothalamus, we know what a lion is. Like the first time I heard a lion roar, I knew exactly what that was. I didn't need to ask, hey, what's that sound? I knew that was a lion.
Yeah.
Like I knew way down in my core that like, that's something that wants to eat me right now. And that's fun. It's fun to feel like you move down the food chain.
Right. And then of course the snakes, and as I like to joke, curiosity will kill you in Africa.
That's so true. That's so true. Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, we forget the fact that we are very easy game in that continent. I mean, we are very easy to eat.
And there's no rescue, right?
Yeah.
It's self-rescue,
Sure.
Unless you happen to be close to a city. And even then, I don't know. I mean, South Africa's got outstanding medical facilities if you can get to them.
Sure. Yeah, that reminds me of a great book. It's called Death in the Tall Grass. And it's one of the best books I've ever read about humans mostly surviving these encounters with wild animals. So
for years I exhibited at Safari Club International.
That's right.
I had a lot of African friends and friends from all over the world, New Zealand and places. And every so often, someone limping through the convention center, and I'd be like, "Oh, a leopard got you," and it takes months, sometimes years, to heal after a mauling.
Wow.
Because their claws are full of nasty little infectious
bacteria
stuff.
And everything.
Bacteria.
Sure. Interesting.
Necrophilia and whatever.
It starts to
necrotic.
Yeah,
flesh,
starts to make your flesh die. Oh, terrible, man. But I love that, even that feeling of you go to a little game lodge and you got to have your escort to get you back to your room. And at first I'm like, it's just right over there. And they're like, well, you can't see all this stuff. There are leopards out here, and they've seen them. And so that's why you have the guy with the gun and the torch.
And the elephants can walk so silently.
It's insane.
They walk between the buildings, and they'll tiptoe through the garden and take
insane.
vegetables. And yeah, it's just so probably not recommended. But I was in Zimbabwe with some friends, and the challenge comes. It's we went swimming in Lake Kariba, which is foolish,
filled with crocs. Isn't
it is, yeah. So, but we're out in the middle, so they circle the boat.
Okay.
This is after promising.
Is that what you told yourself?
Yeah, this is after promising not to do this, and I jumped into the middle of Lake Kariba on it was 100 degrees. I jumped in and I got out pretty quick, but the rush that I got, oh my God, it was like the first time I jumped out of an airplane.
Sure.
And then, so of course I'm there, and we're at the lodge. We get to the lodge that night, and there's a hippo on the lawn. My friend looks over and goes, "You're not a real Zimbo unless you can slap a hippo on the ass." And I don't know if people know this, but hippos are the biggest killers in Africa.
They are.
And that was the second biggest rush I ever got.
Were you successful?
Oh, yeah, I slapped it on the booty. Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
That is the first time I have ever heard of somebody trying that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you're still sitting here. I
mean, sometimes you got to take some risks, to have some fun. But it's not something that I don't seek death. But it's definitely, I like being out there on the edge. And, we were, I was joking with you about, different things that I've thought of through the years. And I don't know if you want to hear something that I wrote.
Okay, I'd love to. Yeah.
My ego died, but I'm still alive. Walking the warrior's path, it's where I thrive. Traveled to the edge, looked death in the eye, turned before he looked back, much to my surprise. On a starry night, the leopard stepped by. Fear not the rapture of the deep. Chase your dreams until you sleep.
Yeah.
So I wrote that about a year ago at the start of the pandemic.
Yeah.
I was just sitting in an airport, and I just, for some reason, I felt like, will I ever go on another adventure? And I think this trip has been the first real trip I've taken since the pandemic.
Yeah.
So it's been,
As travelers, this has been such a challenging time.
Yeah, for people who thrive on going and doing, it's been a tough couple of years.
And do you feel like, I mean, to that poem you just read, do you feel like that you are looking back on your life in that way? I mean, what comes next for Jim? Like, now that you've looked back and you've heard the footsteps of the leopard, and you're looking forward in your life, what is it that you want to do next? What feels like it's next for you?
I'm trying to figure that out. Having, reached an age where my body doesn't take the abuse that it used to. I still love to snowboard, but I pay for it. 3 days of, ibuprofen and
Sure.
So I've been thinking long and hard on that. I have the Sprinter van that was our old trade show vehicle, and I've been kind of monkeying around with converting it into, a van life thing that whatever. And I really think that exploring more of the Western United States, I know there's places I've never been to. And so I'm going to go seek out those less traveled places here for now.
Sure.
And then electric bicycles have kind of caught my eye in a way that I never thought I would. I'm like, I used to be a Harley riding, motorcycle loving fool.
Yeah.
And I'm like, my friends would laugh at me for wanting to ride one of them electric bikes, but there's something serene and peaceful about them, creeping through the woods and not disturbing the elk. And so I've been kind of on the hunt for an electric bike.
And there's a bunch of options.
Oh my God. Now. Yeah. I just walking through the show I was just blown away how fast it's advancing.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of, where I want to go. And then you and I were talking earlier about sailing, and I have challenged myself to always face my fears. And one of the things, being a reconnaissance Marine, I'm not afraid of the water, but like the deep blue is still like the big ocean with the storms kick up on a boat is kind of, for me, is still kind of like, wow, it's all inspiring and
humbling for sure.
I did a dive trip out to Cocos Island where we did the crossing, 40 hours in pretty heavy seas and deep diving nitrox once you get with the sharks and stuff. And
sure.
And I miss the ocean. That's one thing I'll say. I never thought I would live in Montana as long as I have. I never thought I'd live away from the coast. So I do miss the ocean at times, and I would love to maybe put that last fear to rest. Not that I'm totally afraid, but I'm respectful of the ocean because I've seen its power.
It's incredible. When Brian and I did that crossing, we were 1,000 miles from land at one point, and we were becalmed. There was no wind, so we were just sitting there kind of bobbing in the sailboat. 1,000 miles from land. The closest land was Hawaii, and it was 16,000 feet of water below us.
Good Lord.
And we decided that we were going to jump in. And the first time, I don't think I really recognized what was happening so much because it was just the thrill of jumping in the water. But the next time I jumped in, I dove in as deep as I could go, and I could see all of the columns of light coming down to this point of black below me, and the transition from the warm water on the surface to this very cold, very unforgiving, very foreign place for a human to be. I got back to the surface pretty quick. And it was this recognition that, yes, we're on this boat that's designed to go around the world, but we are very fragile creatures in that space. And so you're right, it is a fear for sure for many of us.
Well, when you dive a lot, it's like you get nitrogen narcosis, and that is the rapture of the deep. And it's very tempting to swim off into the darkness. That's why you never dive alone.
Interesting. I didn't know that. I've never done any diving like that.
Your blood saturates with nitrogen and
interesting
laughing gas, and you start to get a little lightheaded. And
gotcha.
Yeah,
you're in the moment too much.
Yeah, and you can follow the fish down.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating. A couple questions that come to mind for me that I like to ask is, are there any significant books or maybe inspirational people in your life that have shared something with you, or a podcast that you've enjoyed listening to? What are some ways that you get inspired?
I've read a lot of the classic literature, and crazy enough, when I was younger, a lot of Robert E. Howard, the creator of the Conan series, was something I read a lot when I was in my teenage years. Just great adventure style books. I think he's a forgotten author these days.
Sure.
People realize Edgar Rice Burroughs, all those, and then of course the Africa books.
What's one of your favorite Africa books?
The Sunbird.
Okay.
I can't remember the author's name, but it's a great book. It flashes back between future time and present time.
Okay.
And ancient society.
Oh wow.
He's a famous author. It'll come to me after we're done.
Sure. We'll put it in the show notes.
People know who it is. So
yeah.
And then for me, theory books on manufacturing and process. I nerd out on that, and and I love to see all the connections between how things work. And so it's one of the reasons why I love being a manufacturer. It's like process improvement, or the whole pursuit of optimization and perfection. But for me, I don't want to compromise quality, right? So it's all like the Toyota production system. That's why I'm kind of a Toyota nut.
Sure. Kaizen, lean manufacturing, right. TMS, sure.
So I love theories, and whether I may not understand all of them, but I just love reading the books and trying to find a connection, how I can apply that to real life. And so that for me,
and I do see that with you because TMS is so much about not only this emphasis on quality, durability, and reliability, which are the hallmarks of the Toyota brand, but it also is towards this minimalism and doing more with less and less waste. And I see that. I mean, you've talked about that in your manufacturing process, and you've also shared that with me about your life, is that you travel very minimally and you don't bring a lot of redundancy, and you try to not get distracted by a bunch of extra gear.
Yeah, it frees you, right? If you're a younger traveler and you're just kind of starting out in the world, and I've seen people get too wrapped up in the whole gear chase and the planning and all this. And I get phone calls from people. Jim, you're the only person I know that can go in a week's notice. You want to go to Italy and blow glass? Absolutely.
Sure.
Passport's up to date. I'm out of here.
Yeah.
Next thing you know, I'm in Murano sitting with the masters that who taught my teacher.
Wow.
And that's rare access, but you have to be able to say yes. And Africa for me opened up in much the same way. It was my cooking that got me invited into the inner circle of these trips and stuff, because the safari lodges are always labor or whatever.
Yeah.
But not everybody wants to be in the safari lodge, and they want to get out to the outlying camps. And so my friend Hama's like, you can stay. And I'm like, really? Yes. I called home on the satellite phone. Hey, they want me to stay. How long? 3 weeks. Okay. And again, that's, you go through Etosha, and we would camp in places we're not supposed to. They don't like you camping wild, but that's why the leopard stepped by, and there was a dead impala near the camp, and he went in that night and got it back, and And I laid awake at night thinking he might come bite me on the top of my skull, but eventually I fell asleep. Thinking, so be it.
Yeah. What an amazing life you've lived, man. And how can people find more about you and about RedOxx?
I'm pretty much an open book. You can go to RedOxx.com, RedOxx, and I've blogged some of my stories, the dive stories, the safaris.
You've got some great resources on there.
And I like to be, share what I know and or give me a call. We can talk and give you some good tips on what to pack and where to go. And I've got great friends here and there, and you can hook up with them on the trail and visit them and say hello and have a cup of coffee.
Well, thank you, Jim. As always, it's been a pleasure to know you for the decades that I have. It's been so impressive to watch you build your business in such a sustainable way, employing Americans, American manufacturing, high-quality equipment. That's certainly something for all of us aspire towards. And thank you so much for being on the podcast, man.
Thanks, Scott. You guys have done an amazing job with everything at Overland.
Thank you so much.
We're
grateful. And we thank you all for listening, and we will talk to you next time.